this is an interesting graph, November the 5th. In 1 week it went up $100 billion. This is the adjusted monetary base as of November the 5th. And as of October the 22nd, it was $300 billion. This is the change from a year ago. And you can just see that this thing goes bananas. It goes like a rocket ship. This is like the shuttle. And you can see for the last 30 years, the change in the adjusted monetary base was relatively little compared. There were a couple of periods here where we had a significant increase in the monetary base of $100 billion, and then down, and we had sort of falling money supply. And now you can see that actually put into the adjusted monetary base $400 billion and growing. So there's a lot of money sloshing around out there, and the question is, will mom and pop from Kankakee actually spend it? Or will they tuck it under their mattress? And will it help the banks to free up the lending issue that now really is a serious concern of this country, that the banks are not lending? And even when President Bush goes and tries to jawbone the banks, they're not very receptive to his jawboning about lending. This is a very significant chart. I don't think you'll ever, and I've never seen anything like this before, and I don't think probably you will either. But this column right here is the exchange rate of various currencies with the US dollar. This is October the 6th, a single day. On October the 6th, a single day, the Australian dollar fell almost 7%. Remember when I read you the difference between the definition of a depression was extreme exchange rate volatility? And I'm not saying we're in a depression, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that we are experiencing 100-year exchange rate volatility. You can look at any of these, and nobody could believe these. This is from Kitco, by the way. Brazilian real down 6.5%. British pound down 1.6%. And when I say down, I mean the dollar's going up. Then I'm getting phone calls. They're saying, how can the dollar be going up? They just put $400 billion into the marketplace. And the answer is because everybody wants dollars. And there were some very good points made at lunch today about the fact that this dollar, US dollar, could conceivably go to par, could go to 100, could go all the way up. Because there's so much debt out there that has to be done away with, and you've got to have dollars and yen and Swiss francs to do that. Going down this list, you can see that the yuan is the only one that appreciated. The Hong Kong dollar, the yen. The yen has gone higher than the dollar. So we have the yen and the dollar moving up, and this was, in my opinion, this was an attempt to erase the yen carry trade and the reverse carry trade, where people borrowed dollars to invest in their own countries, and borrowed Swiss francs, like the Hungarians borrowed Swiss francs to do their housing. So it's a hell of a mess, let's put it that way. But I think one of the biggest issues in this whole problem is, what are we going to do with the currency regime? There's something called Bretton Woods. Bretton Woods was when we had fixed exchange rate backed currency, the US dollar, the important currency at the time, backed by gold. And that if they can solve that kind of a problem in their current deliberations, that will be very important, because this kind of volatility is not good. These are called credit default swaps, and I won't go into the detail. These are the derivatives that Mr. Buffett called weapons of mass financial destruction. You may recall that. And you can see here the notional value. That's not the amount that has to be repaid, but the notional value is somewhere between $500 and $700 trillion. Credit default swaps are insurance policies against the default on debt. Okay? And so what you see here is the premium for most of 07 and most of 08 was anywhere between 20 basis points and 100 basis points. And then by July of 08, recently, the premium to write insurance, to take insurance on a bond that you want to issue, went to 800 basis points on average, and excluding high risk, it went to 400 basis points. So the cost of insurance increased exponentially in the time between July and September, and it's still expensive. Now, these credit default swaps were called, once Lehman went into bankruptcy, it triggered settling of the credit default swaps on the Lehman debt. WAMU was the same thing. We're working through those problems, but it does show the severity of what happened in the market. And then you may ask, what about equities? And this is the S&P 500 adjusted for inflation. And it's very interesting because if you look back in 1965, you'll see a triple waterfall, or I call it a triple waterfall anyways. You'll see this market failing, and you'll see between 1965 and 1981, equities did, on a real basis, equities did not do well for your return. In other words, for 16 years, the equity markets lagged. And you may remember, it was either Time Magazine, I think it was Time Magazine, had an article titled The Death of Equities, right at the bottom of the market. I'd love to see something like that today. But as you see here, in 81 we had the fantastic bull market that started, and they've got dates on these things. And then we have the breaking of the dot-com bubble and the breaking of the housing bubble. So we've had two steps down of significant size, 53% in real terms and 49%. And the question is, are we in another triple waterfall in the S&P 500? And the answer is, I don't know. I wish I did know, but it's possible. And this is going to take some time to repair because this destroys investor confidence, this kind of volatility and this kind of the question is why? And we quote Alan Greenspan, 1027, so just a few days ago really. He said, this crisis is broader than anything I could have ever imagined. This is the leader of the biggest central bank in the free world. I think we ought to take his salary back. Amen. The best insights of mathematicians and finance experts failed. I'm quoting him. The whole intellectual edifice collapsed in the summer of last year because the data inputted into the risk management models, the so-called value at risk models, covered only the past 2 decades, a period of euphoria. He said he was in a state of shocked disbelief. The solution? The mathematical models need to be fitted more appropriately to historical periods of stress. But we were warned about this several times from 2002 on. Warren Buffett called these derivatives. By the way, interestingly enough, one of the reasons I left academia was we were looking at teaching all these derivatives, and nobody really knew what the hell the model underneath the derivatives was. It was something called Brownian motion, which is how little bugs float around in liquid, in Ito's lemon, all that kind of stuff. So nobody really knew. So we fitted the price to the model, not the market, if you know what I mean. In other words, the model determined the price. The mathematical model determined the price of a lot of these things, and it turned out we underestimated the risk in that by a lot. Or maybe the risk mechanism wasn't there. In 2002, Mr. Buffett said credit default swaps were time bombs that could wreck the financial system. He called them financial weapons of mass destruction. I think he had a few in his portfolio too. At the same time, Chairman Greenspan extolled the virtues of derivatives, arguing the benefits outweighed the cost and more regulation was unnecessary. Of course, in 1987, we had a very simple derivative. Remember, called portfolio insurance. The idea was you sell the futures contract, and it's a perfect hedge. The problem is that melted down the market in October of '87 as well. So maybe I hope we'll learn something about derivatives. Perhaps we'll have a clearing corporation or some kind of an intermediary that tells us how to settle these derivatives.